Welcome to the PHP Essential Training Series. I'm Mike King, your host, and in this tutorial we're going to talk about the if statement in PHP. So we're going to be looking at conditional statements in PHP over the next few tutorials. Conditional statements are a big part of any programming language. The standard programming conditional is the standard if statement. The if statement allows your application to make a decision based on the condition of the statement. The if construct is one of the most important features of any programming language, and that includes PHP. The if statement will execute a single statement or a group of statements if a certain condition is met. The condition must evaluate to true. In the standard form, it does nothing if the condition is not met or the condition is false. And there's actually other conditional statements that we'll talk about in future tutorials that actually take into account if the initial condition is not true or is false. So the standard syntax for an if statement is as follows. You'll have your if, the actual statement itself, then in parentheses you're going to put in the condition that you want to evaluate to true. Then inside curly braces you're going to have the statement or statements that you actually want to execute if that condition is true. And it looks something like this. We have our program flow, then we build in our condition. If the condition evaluates to true, we run a block of code, and then it goes back down and joins the program flow. If the condition is false, it actually drops right through the condition and continues on with the program flow, so it never executes that if true execute this code block. It's very important that you watch the syntax very closely. Forgetting a semicolon, a curly brace, and opening or closing parentheses will cause errors during execution, and we'll practice that throughout the tutorials. PHP uses Boolean concepts of true and false when determining whether to execute the statements in the curly braces, and that's true with most programming languages. Most programming languages will use that Boolean concept of either true or false when it's evaluating an if statement. If the condition is true, the statements are executed. If it is false, they are not. It's pretty much that simple. So let's go ahead and drop into our development environment and we'll work through some exercises on the if statement in PHP. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and drop out of our presentation and drop into our development environment. I want to go ahead and confirm that we have the Apache server up and running, because again, we're working with PHP, it's server side, so we have to have that server running to do any of our demonstrations. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Google Chrome. Let me go ahead and refresh this browser window and bring up Sublime Text 2, which will be my text editor for this demonstration. So the first thing we're going to do is right below our H1 heading, I'm going to go ahead and open up a PHP block. You should be getting pretty familiar with these blocks by now. We have our less than sign, our question mark, then our PHP, then I'm going to skip a few lines, and I'm going to close that block with the question mark greater than sign. And let's go ahead and create a few variables. I'm going to create a variable A, which is going to be equal to 19. Then I'm going to come down and create a variable B, which will be equal to James. I'm going to go ahead and create a variable C, which is going to be equal to 22. And I'm going to create a variable D, which will be equal to, we'll say Peter. And again, I'm just making up these values just for the sake of our demonstration. And then I'm going to create a variable E, which is going to be equal to, in quotation marks, 20. I'm going to end all of those with a semicolon. So we got 5 values inside of our variables. And again, I'm not following best practices for naming these variables. I'm just using A, B, C, and D. It's not a good idea to do that in a live program. I'm just doing it for the sake of simplicity. In a program, you want your variable names to relate to what they're actually storing. So this is something we would not do as we're developing our live applications, because those variable names have nothing to do with the values that they're storing. And it would be hard to come back at a later date and say, okay, what was variable A for? Anyway, let's go ahead and create the if statement. I'm going to put if, and then inside my parentheses, I'm going to say, let's look at that very first variable. I'm going to say variable A, and let's say it's equal to 20. And then I'm going to open up my curly braces, and I'm going to come down here and say echo, because I want this printed out to our browser window. The code inside the if statement was executed. And this is just to let us know whether or not we actually ran the code inside that actual if statement. Then I'm just going to go ahead and put an echo. So I'm going to have another echo inside my curly braces, and I'm just going to echo a line break so that we actually have a line break in there, because we're going to do some other stuff in some other exercises. Then I'm going to come down below the curly brace and echo code continues, so that you know when we're outside the conditional statement, you'll know that we're outside that when that code continues appears in our browser window. So right now, let me explain a few things. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as on this. Let's go ahead and save this as exercise 2. So you have that blank template in the event you have the access to the exercise files, that blank HTML template. What I've done here is I've created 5 variables. I've got a couple of number variables. I've got a couple string variables. Then I have a string variable e, which actually has a number in it. You're going to see in a future demonstration why I did that. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm asking A, are you equal to 20? And I want you to notice those double equal signs. That's a comparison operator inside PHP, and actually inside quite a few programming languages. If I were to use a single equal sign, it's actually going to assign the value of 20 to the variable A. So I'm using a double equal sign as a comparison. I'm actually comparing the value inside the A variable to the number that I've typed here. So that could be equal to any number I wanted to. But right now, what I want you to notice is that this is going to evaluate to true or to false, because A inside of our variable is actually 19, and 19 does not equal 20. So for the first demonstration, we should actually only see code continues on our browser window, because it's not going to execute any of the code inside the if statement. So let's go ahead and save those changes. Let's go back and actually load up exercise 2 in our browser window, and you'll notice the only thing we see is code continues. And again, that's because I'm making a comparison between the value of A and the number 20. So let's just go ahead and say A is 20. Let's go ahead and save that change. Now this should evaluate to true, because the value of A actually does equal 20. So we save the change, refresh our browser window. Now you'll notice the code inside the if statement was executed. We see our line break, which is why we're on a new line here for code continues. So we've actually made that very first comparison, and this one did evaluate to true where the previous one evaluated to false. The key to remember with our if statements is that whatever we have in the parentheses has to evaluate to true. I could actually have this compare to another variable. Let's actually have this compare to variable C. So I don't have to have a fixed value in here. I could actually have the variable A compare to the variable C. And if I save those changes, I'm just going to do a save as and save this as exercise 3 inside our work files. Go back and load exercise 3. You'll notice now that we're not executing the code inside the if statement, because again, A is not equal to C. A is equal to 20, and C is equal to 22. And again, with the comparison operator, the double equal signs, it is not equal 20. But let me show you how we can actually have this evaluate to true if I wanted this code to evaluate. Using some of the operators that we have available inside of PHP, I could actually take out one of the equal signs and put in the exclamation point. And now I'm asking, is A not equal to C? Because that exclamation point means not. So this would evaluate to true because A is not equal to C. Let's go ahead and save that change. Refresh our browser window. Now you'll notice the code inside the curly braces does execute, because A is not equal to C. If I were to change A to 22 and save that change, now this is not going to evaluate true, because again, A is equal to C. So there's a lot of ways we can play with these operators inside PHP by using the not operator, the greater than, the less than, and we'll go through a couple of other demonstrations so you can see what I'm talking about. But there's a lot of different ways to use the operators, and we're going to cover all these operators in a future tutorial that could actually you could get the evaluations the way you wanted them to be. I could also compare strings. Let's go ahead and change this to B. So now we're looking at the variable B, and change it to D. So again, I'm asking, is B not equal to D? Save those changes again, refresh our browser window, and it's true. James is not equal to Peter. So the code inside the if statement was executed. All right, so let's look at another type of evaluation that we use quite frequently. I'm going to change this back to A. Let's do a save as on this. I'm going to go ahead and save this as exercise 4 inside my exercise folder, and go back here and reload exercise 4. Let's change that to variable A, and let's change this to, we'll make it 25. So again, now we're comparing to a number. But I want to ask A, are you less than or equal to? So again, I'm using those combined operators. Is A less than or equal to 25? And what you're seeing here, A is 22, so it should evaluate true, and the code inside of our braces should execute. Let's go ahead and save the change, refresh our browser window, and you'll notice it is less than or equal to 25, and we know that because we're actually looking at the value of A right here. It's 22. What if I said greater than or equal to 25? Save that change, refresh our browser window. Now it does not evaluate to true because it's not greater than or equal to 25. If I were to make this 25, save that change and take out the equal. So now I'm just asking, is A greater than 25? And again, this should evaluate to false because A is not greater than 25. It actually is 25. If I wanted to include 25, I'd have to have the equal sign in there. Save the change, refresh the browser window, and now the code does execute. Because again, it's evaluating to true. And as I can't overemphasize enough, the key is everything within the parentheses has to evaluate to true to execute the code in the curly braces. I'm going to go ahead and add another line in here. Let's say echo. And I want to say get type. And you actually saw me use this in an earlier exercise. And I'm going to put E inside my parentheses. So I'm going to get the type of variable E. But now what I want to do is I actually want to change A to 20. I'm going to put my double equal signs. Again, my comparison operator is A equal to E. So I'm looking at the value of A, which is 20, and the value of E, which is 20. And I'm asking, is A equal to E? I'm going to save that change, refresh our browser window, and you'll see, oops, hang on, let me put another line break in here so we get this on a separate line. There's a couple ways, by the way, I could have done this line break. I could have actually added it to this echo statement right here. I'm just going to put it on a separate line because I actually could have put it in here. I could have enclosed it in parentheses right there, in quotation marks, I'm sorry, right there. And then I could have actually forced the line break, but I'm just going to do it at the bottom. In fact, we'll leave both in so you can see that they both work. So now we'll have 2 line breaks, one before and one after the get type. Let's go ahead and evaluate this. And I came up with an error. Let me see what that error is telling me. Unexpected get type t-string expecting. Okay, so what I've done is I've actually got an unexpected error here. Let's pull this out. There we go. I'll put that back in a minute. So now what we're saying is, you'll notice it is evaluating to true because the A variable is 20 and the E variable equals 20. The thing I wanted to point out is you'll notice that the E variable is data typing as a string. If I were to actually data type, let's data type the A variable, and you'll notice that's going to evaluate as a number. And actually I spelled get type wrong. I need 2 T's there. That's going to evaluate as a number. And again, I want to put a line break. Don't forget my semicolon. Let's save that change. Refresh the browser window. You'll see that I've got an integer for my type A, and I've got a string for my type E. If I want an identical comparison, in other words, if I want to make certain that both A and E are evaluating as the exact same variable, in other words, that 20 is a number in A and 20 is a number in E, I actually use 3 equal signs, because now this is going to prove to be false because A is not identical to E, and identical would mean not only are the same value, but they're the same data types. Let's go ahead and save that change, refresh our browser window, and you'll see now that we drop completely out of this code. We didn't execute any of it because they're not identical. E is a string and A is an integer. So it's very important to understand, not only are we concerned when we're using the triple equal signs, or not only are we concerned with the values, but we're also concerned with the data types. A double equal sign is a comparison. A triple equal sign is an identical comparison. So they're identical not only in value, but in data type. So let's take out that triple. Let's go ahead and save that change. Refresh our browser window, and now you'll see again, they're evaluating to true because they are the same. They're the same values, because keep in mind, E is only storing the value 20. It's not storing the quotation marks. And A is storing the value 20 as a number. And we're not asking it, are you identical? We're just asking it, are you the same? Are you the same value, which they are, but they're not the same data types. All right, so as a note, let's put a couple of comments in here so we can get used to adding comments. I'm just going to put a couple single line comments. So a single equal is an assignment operator. It actually assigns a value to the variable. Right happened what there. A double equal sign is a comparison operator, and it compares the values to one another. And a triple equal sign, and you don't see triple used very often, but it is used, is an identical comparison. And an identical comparison means not only do the values have to be the same, but the data types have to be the same. And you'll see all three of these throughout programming languages. They're used not only in PHP, but they're used in most programming languages as comparison operators. The key to remember, because the triple one doesn't really mess people up very often, because one, it's not used a lot, because we usually know what data types we're dealing with, and we're going to make a comparison to two numbers. We're normally not going to compare a string to a number. So the comparison doesn't mess people up very often. The triple's not used that often, but it is used, so I want you to be aware of it. The one that tries to, or kind of trips people up a lot, is you'll see a lot of if conditions like this, where we actually put A equal to 20. And people will consider that a comparison, and it's not. It's actually an assignment. So what I'm doing, if A is equal to 20, I'm actually assigning the value of 20 to A. This will always evaluate to true. It'll always be true because A will always be equal to 20, or if I made this 25, because we're actually assigning it inside the parentheses. So if I were to save that change, I'm going to do save as. Let's go ahead and save this as exercise 5. I'm going to go ahead and load this up in our browser. That will always evaluate to true because we're making the assignment inside the if statement. So don't let that one trip you up. I see that mistake a lot when some of my users send me their code and they'll say, hey, I've got a problem with this conditional statement and I can't figure out what it is. It's always running my code and it shouldn't be. And the first thing I'll notice is that they've actually used an assignment operator inside the conditional statement instead of a comparison operator. So normally in the if statement, you're going to be using double equals, greater than, less than an equal to, or greater than an equal to. Those are the ones you see most often. We've got a lot more operators that we're going to be using throughout the tutorials. In fact, when we get into the next tutorial, I'm actually going to talk about some of the and or operators when we're looking at the if-else statements. So I hope this explained the if statement rather clearly. This is the things we do most often inside programming. We use a lot of conditional statements. There's a couple more that we're going to talk about in the next tutorials. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drop out of the development environment. Let's go back into our presentation for a quick review of what we talked about. So conditional statements are a very important part of programming. You're going to see them all over your programming code. We'll use a lot of them throughout our demonstrations. The one we just spoke about was the if statement. There are more that we're going to cover. The comparison operators, very important in conditional statements. We talked about the comparison operator, which is the double equal sign. It compares two values. We talked about the greater than sign, which compares a value whether it's greater than the value it's being compared to. We looked at the greater than or equal to, which compares the value whether it's greater than or equal to the number it's being compared to or the variable. We looked at the less than sign. We looked at the less than or equal to sign. And the one that we looked at and talked about most was that identical. Both the value and the data type have to be equal in order for that to evaluate to true. Again, don't forget the condition inside the parentheses in an if statement must evaluate to true in order for the code to be executed. Very important concept in conditional statements.